My family was starving.
More?
September 1944. A U.S. prisoner of war camp in the American Midwest. Morning air is cool. Dust lifts with each step. From behind a low wooden building, the smell of bread drifts out. Warm, heavy, unmistakable. 20 German women sit at long tables. Their uniforms are faded, sleeves rolled too many times, hands thin enough that knuckles stay sharp even at rest. They have been told captivity means hunger, humiliation, and food measured by control. Metal trays slide in front of them. Bread, beans, something dark and thick that still steams. One woman freezes, staring at the portion. She whispers, barely audible, "My family was starving." No one answers her. A guard walks past and asks, simply, "More?" Why were prisoners being fed like this? What happened next would leave them full and ashamed at the same time. They had learned how to eat without being seen. In Germany, hunger had become a shared language. Everyone spoke it. Civilians, soldiers, women in uniform. You learned to stretch bread across days, to swallow soup slowly, to pretend fullness so children would stop asking. By 1944, food was no longer about nourishment. It was about survival math. The women who now sat in an American camp carried that math inside them. Each one could still picture a kitchen back home. Empty shelves, pots kept for habit, not use. Letters that spoke carefully about rations getting smaller, neighbors disappearing, winters that came too early. They had crossed the Atlantic with those images still fresh. So when the trays arrived in America, the portions felt wrong. Not unfamiliar. Wrong. Bread that bent instead of cracking. Beans that held heat. Meals that did not need to be rushed. They did not touch the food at first. This was how tricks began. Back home, abundance meant inspection. Someone always counted. Someone always corrected. Here, no one stood close. The guards moved through the room without watching mouths. The cooks worked with their backs turned. No one cared who ate how much. That made the food heavier than it looked. They ate slowly, each bite measured against memory. By the end of the first meal, several women stopped early, not because they were full, because finishing felt dangerous. They waited for the return of hunger. It did not come. The second meal arrived on time. The same portions. By the third, something shifted. Hands steadied. Dizziness faded. The body stopped bargaining with itself. That was when the thoughts began. If we are eating like this, what is happening at home? Letters had been slow. When they came, they were thin and careful. No details. No complaints. Just hints. Food is scarce. We manage. We are alive. Those words echoed now in a room that smelled of bread. One woman folded a piece into her pocket out of reflex, then stopped herself. There was nowhere to hide it. No need. That realization hurt. Being allowed to eat until full was not comforting. It was disorienting. The women had been prepared for cruelty. Hunger would have made sense. Hunger would have fit the story they had been told. Instead, the meals kept coming. Day after day. At one table, a woman finally finished her tray. Every bite. She sat still afterward, waiting for consequence. None came. A pot appeared beside her plate. A voice asked, "More?" She thought of her mother boiling water to stretch soup, of neighbors trading furniture for flour, of children learning to sleep through hunger. Her throat tightened. She nodded once. The food was added without comment. That night, lying on her bunk, she understood the problem. Hunger had always been shared. This fullness was not. Each meal made the distance between her body and her family larger. Each full stomach felt like a quiet betrayal. In the days that followed, the women spoke less at meals. Eating became silent work. No one commented on portions anymore. They ate because the food was there, and because refusing did not change anything. The shame did not stop the meals. And the next day, it happened again. The second meal came sooner than expected. Not because time moved faster, but because their bodies had stopped bracing for delay. In Germany, you learned not to trust schedules. Kitchens ran out, deliveries failed, meals shifted without warning. Hunger taught patience by force. Here, the bell rang when it said it would. The women stood, lined up, and moved forward with trays held flat against their ribs. Habit kept their shoulders tense. Eyes stayed low. The room smelled the same as yesterday. Bread again, beans again. Steam rising from metal. No variation, no surprise. That consistency unsettled them more than shortage ever had. One woman took her portion and sat. She broke the bread carefully, as if testing it. Soft inside, still warm. She pressed it with her thumb. It sprang back. She ate half, stopped, waited. Her stomach did not protest. No cramp, no sharp pull, just space. That was new. Across from her, another woman ate faster, too fast. Her hands shook slightly as she scooped beans, afraid the bowl might be taken away mid-motion. It wasn't. She finished everything, then froze, spoon resting in the empty bowl. A guard passed behind her chair. She stiffened. Nothing happened. He kept walking. That was the first time one of them realized something quietly dangerous. No one was monitoring their hunger. In the camp back home, hunger had been controlled, used. Portions were a tool. You learned obedience by learning emptiness. Here, eating seemed detached from punishment. That made it harder to understand. The third meal came that evening. Same food, same amount, same question. More? This time, two women said yes. Not loudly, just a nod, a small lift of the hand. The extra portion landed on their trays with a soft sound. No comment, no reaction. They ate it. Slowly, as if waiting for something to stop them. Nothing did. Later, in the barracks, one woman sat on her bunk staring at her hands. They looked fuller already, less sharp, veins less pronounced. She pressed her fingers into her palm. It hurt slightly. That was proof. Food was staying. That night, sleep came heavier than before. Bodies that had lived on edges finally had something to rest on. But sleep brought dreams. Kitchens without food. Tables set but empty. Children watching. Morning came with the bell. Breakfast was already waiting. The women began to understand the pattern. Food was not a reward. It was not a test. It was simply there. That realization did not bring comfort. It brought unease. If this was normal here, then everything they had endured before had been unnecessary. That thought was harder to swallow than the food. One woman tried to skip breakfast the next day, sat with her tray untouched, told herself she wasn't hungry. Her stomach disagreed. She ate anyway. Being allowed to eat until full became routine faster than they wanted. Within a week, hands no longer trembled at the sight of bread. The smell stopped causing dizziness. Portions became familiar shapes. But the guilt grew sharper. Each full meal sharpened the image of home. A mother counting slices. A father trading possessions. A neighbor boiling peels. The women stopped talking about food out loud. Instead, they watched each other. Who finished? Who asked for more? Who stopped early? One afternoon, a woman whispered to another, "Do you think they know?" "Know what?" "That we are eating like this." The other woman shrugged. The question had no answer. The guards never commented. The cooks never reduced portions. The trays never came back lighter. Hunger, once their shared bond, was gone. Now fullness isolated them from their own past. That night, One woman folded a piece of bread again. This time, she ate it later, in the dark, slowly, like a secret. She did not enjoy it. She was trying to remember how hunger felt, because something inside her was afraid of forgetting. And the next day, the meal came again. By the third week, the meals no longer felt surprising. That was the problem. Surprise had protected them. It allowed disbelief. It allowed distance. You could tell yourself this was temporary, a mistake, a pause before something worse. Routine took that away. Breakfast arrived at the same time each morning. The bell, the shuffle of boots, the scrape of benches, trays sliding across wood. Bread, beans, coffee, thin but hot. Enough. Always enough. At first, the women had watched the food. Now they watched each other. Who ate quickly? Who slowed down? Who asked for the second serving without looking up? The question came every time. More. It was asked the same way a man might ask if you needed another chair. No emphasis. No test. The first week, only one or two nodded, carefully, almost apologetically. The second week, more hands lifted. By the third, it became normal. That normalization scared them. In Germany, nothing about food was normal anymore. Eating had weight. It had consequence. It meant someone else went without. Here, the pot kept coming back full. One woman began finishing her meals automatically. She noticed it only when her tray was empty and her hand kept moving, searching for what was no longer there. She sat back, surprised. Her stomach felt heavy, not painfully, solid. That feeling carried into the afternoon. Work details were lighter now, less dizziness, fewer pauses. No one sat down suddenly because the world had tilted. Bodies adjusted. Minds did not. At lunch one day, a woman laughed by accident. The sound startled her. She pressed her lips together immediately, eyes darting to see who had heard. No one reacted. Laughter was allowed here too. That night, she cried quietly into her blanket, not from sadness exactly, from confusion. The meals continued. Always on time. Always enough. Being allowed to eat until full stopped feeling like mercy. It started feeling like exposure. With every full stomach, the distance between the camp and home became more defined. One woman counted the calories in her head without meaning to. She had done that for months before capture. She stopped halfway through the calculation. There was no shortage to calculate against. That absence left her restless. Letters began to arrive more regularly. Thin paper. Careful words. We manage. Food is difficult. Winter will be hard. The women read them after meals. That order mattered. Reading those words on a full stomach felt wrong in a way they could not explain. One woman folded her letter and pushed her tray away untouched that evening. She told herself she was not hungry. Her body disagreed. She ate anyway. The guilt did not lessen. It layered. Meal after meal. The same pattern repeated. Eat. Remember. Feel ashamed. Eat again. No one spoke about it directly. But small changes appeared. Some women stopped asking for seconds, not because they didn't want them, because asking felt like a choice they should not make. Others asked every time, then avoided eye contact while eating. One woman began leaving bread untouched. She stacked slices neatly on her tray, like inventory. The guard noticed. "You don't want it?" he asked. She shook her head quickly. He shrugged and moved on. The bread stayed. That indifference cut deeper than any punishment would have. No one cared if she refused abundance. That meant abundance was real. One afternoon, the pot came back around later than usual, only a few minutes. The women noticed immediately. Hands paused, heads lifted. When it arrived, full as always, relief washed through the room too fast. They had not realized how much they depended on the repetition until it threatened to break. That scared them more than hunger ever had. At night, the women began to dream differently. Not of bombs, not of sirens, of tables, long tables, full tables, empty chairs. They woke unsettled, hearts racing, stomachs calm. One woman began keeping a small list in her head. Meals eaten since capture. Meals her family might have missed. The numbers did not align. They never would. Being allowed to eat until full became something they carried, not enjoyed. It sat between bites, between thoughts. One morning, a woman finally spoke the words aloud. What if they think we deserve this? The question hung in the air. No one answered. Because the idea that they might be considered worthy of food was more frightening than the idea of being punished. In the world they came from, worth had been tied to sacrifice. Here, worth seemed assumed. That contradiction had no place to settle. At dinner that night, the woman ate every bite, then nodded when the pot appeared. More? Yes. Her voice was steady. Later, lying on her bunk, she stared at the ceiling and realized something else. The meals were not changing. They were not building toward anything. They simply continued. And that's when it started to feel wrong. The comparison did not arrive all at once. It slipped in quietly, between mouthfuls. At first, it was accidental. A smell that reminded someone of a kitchen that no longer existed. Bread that felt too soft compared to what memory insisted bread should be. Then it became deliberate. They began to measure. Not the food in front of them, but the distance between this table and another one far away. At breakfast, one woman tore her bread in half and stared at it longer than necessary. She imagined her mother doing the same thing, counting slices before deciding who ate first. She swallowed. The coffee was hot. That alone felt like an accusation. At home, fuel was scarce. Water boiled once, then cooled. Heat was saved for the sick or the very young. Here, steam rose freely. No one told them to hurry. Lunch came with the same portions as always. Beans again. Thick, heavy, filling. A woman pushed her bowl away after a few bites and folded her hands in her lap. She told herself she was honoring her family by not eating. Her stomach tightened. She ate anyway. The guilt was no longer sharp. It was dull and constant, like pressure behind the eyes. Letters made it worse. They read them slowly now, unfolding each page as if bracing for impact. Your cousin traded her coat for flour. The bakery closed. We line up before dawn. The words did not accuse them. That was the problem. Silence accused better. They began to eat with their eyes down, focusing on the tray, bread, spoon, steam, anything but the faces across the table. Because everyone knew what everyone else was thinking. One woman started saving her dessert, not to eat later, to look at. She wrapped it in paper and placed it in her footlocker, untouched. Proof that abundance existed, proof that she was part of it. At night, she took it out and stared at it. In Germany, sweets had vanished early. Sugar was a memory. Here, it waited. She did not eat it. The meals continued. Always enough. The guards did not change. They did not comment on how much was eaten. They did not praise restraint or notice excess. Food was not a moral category here. That realization made comparison unavoidable. If food was neutral here, then hunger at home had been manufactured by something else. That thought was dangerous. One afternoon, a woman fainted during work detail, not from hunger, from heat. She was given water, then sent to sit in the shade. At dinner, her tray was already waiting. She stared at it longer than anyone else. My sister is thin now, she said quietly, almost to herself. No one responded. She ate slowly, each bite deliberate, as if explaining herself to someone not present. By evening, the women had stopped pretending the comparison was accidental. They spoke about home more openly now, not in long stories, in fragments. Potato peels. Burned fields. No milk. The words landed heavily in a room that smelled of bread. Being allowed to eat until full had become a mirror they could not turn away from. Every bite reflected another absence. Some women began eating less, others more. Neither choice eased the tension. One woman finished her meal completely and then sat back, hands on her stomach, eyes closed. "I don't know how to carry this," she said. No one asked what she meant. They all knew. At night, sleep became lighter again, not from hunger, but from thoughts that circled without resting. What would they say when they went home? How would they explain full bellies to empty houses? Would anyone believe them? Morning came. Breakfast waited. The repetition felt deliberate now, as if the camp itself was testing them. Not with cruelty, with consistency. The comparison no longer stayed silent. It followed them into each meal. And soon, it would demand something more than thought. No one announced the realization. It arrived the way weather does, quietly, without asking permission. The meals continued. Same bell. Same tables. Same portions. By now, the women no longer flinched at the smell of bread. Their bodies had accepted the rhythm. Hunger no longer led their movements. That was when the silence changed. They stopped talking during meals almost entirely. Not out of fear, out of understanding. Every woman at the table carried the same image now. A kitchen somewhere else. A pot with too much water. A plate divided one time too many. Those images did not need words. One woman noticed that she no longer finished her meals quickly, not slowly either, just evenly, as if timing herself to an internal rule. She realized she was eating the way she wished her family could eat. That thought stayed with her. Another woman began leaving her tray exactly as it arrived, cleaned, stacked, aligned. She did it carefully, as if order could justify fullness. No one commented. The guards did not watch. The cooks did not count. The absence of surveillance became its own pressure. If no one was forcing them to eat, then eating was a choice. That realization sat heavier than hunger ever had. One afternoon, a woman took a second serving and then stopped halfway through it. She stared at the spoon hovering over the bowl. She put it down, not because she was full, because something inside her had reached its limit. Later that night, she whispered to another woman, "I don't think this is about food anymore." The other woman nodded once. They did not expand on it. Letters continued to arrive. Shorter now, more honest. "There is no bread this week. We trade what we can. Winter is close." The women stopped reading them at night. They read them in the morning, before breakfast. That order mattered. Reading first meant eating felt like an act done with open eyes. Some women delayed meals after reading, sat longer, stood outside longer. But the bell always rang. The trays always came. Being allowed to eat until full was no longer shocking. It was no longer comforting. It was simply a fact that could not be reconciled with anything else. One woman began dreaming of her family sitting at her table in the camp. They ate silently. No one looked up. The food never ran out. She woke with a strange feeling. Not relief. Distance. The realization took shape without language. The abundance here was not meant to replace what was missing there. It was not compensation. It was contrast. And contrast does not soften loss. It sharpens it. At one meal, a woman finally stopped eating altogether. Not dramatically. She simply set her spoon down and folded her hands. A guard noticed. "You sick?" he asked. She shook her head. He nodded and moved on. That brief exchange clarified something for her. No one here needed her to perform suffering. No one demanded gratitude. No one required her to earn her meals through pain. That absence stripped away the last excuse. If suffering was not required here, then perhaps it never had been. That thought stayed unspoken, because saying it aloud would have changed everything. The women began to understand something else too. The meals were not teaching them kindness. They were teaching them scale. What a state could afford. What a system could sustain. What had been withheld elsewhere. Those conclusions formed slowly, without speeches or arguments. Just repetition. Eat. Remember. Compare. Eat again. By the end of the month, the women had stopped talking about hunger altogether. Not because it was gone, because it had moved. It now lived in memory, in the way they looked at food, in the way they handled bread, in the way they carried fullness like something borrowed. The realization settled into them quietly. They would never forget this. Not the taste, not the portions, not the fact that no one stopped them. And that knowledge would follow them long after the meals ended. The war ended far away from the tables where they had eaten. News arrived in fragments, announcements read aloud, guards speaking more softly than before, a sense of waiting that no longer had direction. The meals did not change. That was what stayed with them. Not the dates, not the speeches, not the flags, the food. Years later, many of the women would struggle to remember exact places, camp names blurred, faces softened, timelines bent. But the meals remained precise. The weight of a full tray, the sound of bread tearing, the steam rising when the lid came off the pot. One woman remembered the question more clearly than anything else. More? She remembered how ordinary it sounded. After the war, when she returned home, the question never appeared again. There was no more. There was rebuilding, ration cards, long lines, shared kitchens, neighbors who measured portions without looking. She learned to eat differently again, but her hands never forgot how it felt to be allowed to finish. Another woman, married, had children, cooked carefully, never wasted food, never rushed meals. Her children noticed. She never explained why. She always waited until everyone else had eaten before she took her own portion. It was not a rule she taught. It was a habit she carried. Some of the women spoke about captivity later in life, some did not. When they did, they rarely mentioned guards or fences. They mentioned eating. They mentioned being full. They mentioned how strange it felt. One woman wrote in a letter decades later, "I learned what abundance feels like before I learned how to forgive." That sentence was never published. It stayed in a drawer. For most of them, the memory did not resolve into meaning. It stayed an image. A tray, a table, a question asked without judgment. The meals did not erase hunger elsewhere. They did not undo loss. They did not save anyone. They simply existed. And that was why they endured. In old age, one woman sat at a table with her grandchildren. They left food on their plates without thinking. She watched quietly. She did not scold them. She understood that forgetting was a kind of peace. Later that night, she wrapped bread in a napkin out of instinct, then laughed softly at herself. Some habits never leave. Of all the things the war took from her, the strangest thing it gave her was this memory. Not of violence, of being allowed to eat until full. On the last day she spoke about it, she ended with a small detail. "The tray was empty," she said, "and no one told me to stop."